Okay, so first of all, just to answer about the magnetic impurities, because I will not show that in this talk, because I saw it's a conference about phonons and nuclear spins, and chiral phonons. I will talk completely about that. But when you absorb chiral molecule on top of a magnetic surface, it's behave because of spin exchange interaction. It stabilizes the magnetization. You absorb it on a superconductor. If it's just several chiral molecules, you see Shiba-like state, again, like magnetic impurities. If it's a full monolayer, you can see like what Yossi saw, and we saw in a different way by observing. You see a change of the order parameter. But this is not the subject of my talk now. I want to thank the organizer for the very beautiful workshop. And it's very nice to bring different fields and to have those kind of discussion together, because you learn from the two fields and you try to combine them. And this is what we'll try to do. But there is also a full Gordon conference of the chiral-induced spin selectivity effect that Ron was talking about. And this will be next week. But in another 2 years from now, it will be again. I hope not in New Hampshire this time. But I will not be the chair, so I don't really care. So we'll have another Gordon conference 2 years from now. And actually, there's a smaller conference that Jonas is organizing in a year from now. I hope will be in Uppsala.
Sigtuna.
Sigtuna, yeah.
Somewhere in Sweden.
Somewhere in Sweden. Yeah, the first capital of Sweden, as all of us know. Okay, so Ron was talking about spin and electron spin, and he was saying that life is chiral and sugar are D usually, and the chiral symmetry was broken. And indeed, we did a lot of experiments. Ron shows very few of them, but most of them were talking about electronic spin, but not about nuclear spin. But in principle, what Ron was talking about should be applied to nuclear spin, not about molecules, and not much about chiral phonons. But we are in the community. I knew 5 years ago that there should be a conference here. So we are in the community asked, not yet studied, what do we know? What about the CISS and the nuclear spin and the molecule and the lattice? So this was a question we have raised about 5 years ago. Yossi also was working on it a little bit later, and I will show his result. And the main question was, okay, nuclear spin, this is much harder to measure because all the experiments we did on electronic spin were quite simple. What we did, we put a magnetic substrate, we inject one kind of spin or the opposite kind of spin, and measure the CISS effect or the spin polarization or the magnetoresistance effect. And this was quite easy for us, especially as we are coming from transport behavior and optical behavior if we do it optically. So the main thing we decided to do, and this was an experiment which took a lot of time, is to take water molecules, but water molecules with isotope, O16, O17, and O18. There are 3 different masses, so it's important to have the mass effect because the isotope people always look at the mass ratio. They need 3 masses because this should be the slowest, this should be the fastest, and there's some kind of mass effectiveness. But what's nice about this system that this O17, of course, has a nuclear spin. So we'll say if nuclear spin also have this kind of a CISS effect, probably this molecule should behave differently. So the experiment was quite complicated. It started by Yuval Kolodny and ended by other students because we took human cells. And the human cells have aquaporins. It's a chiral channel where water can go through to the channel. We put different concentration of nuclear spin, O16, O17, O18, and we measure how much water got into the cell. So how you do that? You take a cell, you empty it out, you put the concentration, then you take the cells, blow them up, you do mass spec measurement, and then you should see different concentration. Sounds very simple. Not so. All these isotope measurements are very complicated. Try to avoid that. But I didn't do that. Itai Levi from Weizmann Institute, before his lab was broken, was able to do this kind of measurement. And what we got is something very interesting, that there is a different ratio between O17 and O18, depending on how you start. So you start, let's say, by 50-50 concentration, but you look inside the cell, the O17 interacts much stronger with the chiral channel. So again, we were very happy. In the beginning, we said, oh, we found the nuclear CISS effect. The nucleus is much heavier, so it goes slowly, but it's heavier, so the mass is larger, should behave exactly, and you see something which is different. We repeat this experiment by doing an electrolysis experiment. You take water, you split it to hydrogen and oxygen, and then you can cover the electrode with chiral molecules, and you ask yourself, would we see a difference again in isotope if we do this kind of experiment? Because this is a very nice way to check. We have shown with Ron and I and Ron about this company that we have having better water splitting, because this is a singlet state, but this is a triplet state, so it's a spin forbidden process. So in principle, if you improve or you align the spin, you can improve electrolysis. But we were asking about isotopes. And what happened in the isotope? Again, you see O16, O17. Again, the O17 was interacting better with those chiral channels. So in principle, you can say, now that we learn how the CISS works, in principle, it works also for O17 because we have nuclear spins. The nuclear spin talk with electronic spin, and somehow we preserve angular momentum, and we have a better interaction or stronger interaction for the nuclear spin. And indeed, this is what we got, the deviation from an expected mass dependency. And we had a model saying, OK, here we have water, we have electronic spin or para water. And this nuclear spin interacts very strongly with those two states of the water. And because it interacts strongly, we can align the dipole moment, and this dipole moment interact with the aquaprine channel. So what we should take about this, first of all, that we in the new community we are forming, we are talking about nucleus, we are talking about nuclear spin, and we are talking about lattice. And the old community, the CISS community, was talking about electronic spin, but it's all related together because angular momentum is angular momentum. It should be preserved. The nuclear spin is larger, of course, then let's add chiral phonons, like what we are talking about. But everything is connected together. And indeed, we learned that we can observe a nuclear spin, or we can observe the CISS effect, but I think the most important message here is that we couple the electronic spin, or the standard chiral electronic structure, to the nuclear structure. So whenever you're thinking, and I saw here the day before, and even today, many people show Hall effect and use chiral channels or chiral crystal, you should think that whenever nuclear spin, or wherever things go with nucleus, you will also be coupled to the electronic spins, and you should think about the CISS effect as one of the reasons of the things you're seeing. But we move forward, and this is an experiment we have done. We ask, what about proton transfer? Proton transfer, of course, proton is also electron, but proton transfer is the most, here we talked about water going into human cells with aquaprine. Proton transfer is one of the most important electric charge transfer in the body or in life. And proton transfer is very, very important, very heavily studied, but usually we ignore that protons have a spin. So we have a recent paper, and you know this guy, Ron, but it was with many people together, and Nama is the students who have done that. And this is a biologist who prepares the crystals, and Jean-Philippe who have done some of the modeling. So we had this recent paper, and we said coupling between electronic spin and proton transfer in chiral crystal. So proton transfer mechanism, and this is a lesson we know a lot from physics. People were talking a lot about this hoping mechanism. You have a water molecule, the proton hope from one direction to another, and this is just proton hoping. We don't care about the proton spin, and we don't care that whenever a proton is hoped, we have a dipole moment, and this dipole moment will generate an electronic wave to the other side. So again, there's a coupling. This simplified model that everybody is drawing, there's a coupling between the proton transfer and the electronic spin. So you can have proton transfer. And of course, there are a theory between proton-coupled electron transfer that people are thinking about the coupling of proton transfer and electron spin. But here we should also add chiral phonons because the protons are heavier than the spin. So even if we have a proton wave going this direction, electronic wave going in that direction, we should have similar angular momentum, so we should think about chiral phonons as well. So we have proton transfer, we have the electronic spin, we have the phonons, and all of them are done in chiral structure. So we ask ourselves, what can we do? How could we measure this proton transfer? And we found this crystal. Oh, I skipped. Oh, I want to go back, sorry. We found this crystal, and this crystal is a lysosome crystal. And this lysosome crystal is one of the simpler crystals that were found by Fleming before that, because it's a crystal that we have in our tears, in our nose. It's behaving like antibiotics, and it's lysosome because it's fighting against bacteria. So it's a very odd crystal. It's very nice. It's a biological crystal. And here, like most biology transfer or life transfer, it's only proton transfer through the crystal by this proton hopping mechanism. And again, what we are suggesting is that everything is coupled together. So we put the crystal on top of contacts. We had magnetic contacts, and we asked ourselves, actually we wanted to hyperpolarize the protons, but we found something else. But we ask ourselves, do we have a coupling between the proton transfer and the electronic spin? And the experiment was very simple. We drive current from the magnetic contact, so we drive electric spin current through the proton transfer crystals with one kind of electronic magnetization and the opposite kind of electronic magnetization. So we injected different spins, electronic spin, but measure proton current. And what we saw is something very surprising, both in impedance spectroscopy, so here you can see the different resistance, and the measurement which Ron will show you, current versus voltage, by flipping the magnetization, the switching the magnetization of the contact. The electronic spin magnetization changes the current of protons going through the crystals. So there is an immediate coupling between the electronic spin and the proton spin, or the electronic transfer and the proton transfer. So in the beginning, we thought it's hyperpolarization. We said we found a way for hyperpolarization. But I went to Weizmann to talk with Lucy, or Ron was also there, and I said, I found a way. He said, no chance. And he was right. So if you calculate and put the numbers, they are too small. So you have some kinds of other way of coupling, indirect coupling between the proton and the electron. And of course, in this community, everybody would say, it's chiral phonons. And I think it's indeed, I will show you that it's chiral phonons. The crystal, the coupling to the crystal, this is proton wave, this is electronic wave, and there you have angular momentum coupled by chiral phonons. So the first experimental you want to do is you want to add humidity. Those crystals at higher humidity just are taken apart. So you see the conduction grows as the humidity grows, but the coupling to the crystal will be weaker. So what you do is you measure the CISS, the current up minus the current down divided by the sum. And you see that although the current is increasing, the CISS, or the spin polarization, is decreasing. What is the spin polarization? The difference between magnetic up or magnetic down is getting smaller and smaller. The crystal is getting softer and softer. You don't interact with the crystal. You don't have the chiral phonons, and the effect of electronic spin disappears. So we sure have a connection. You need the crystal whenever you drive current, or whenever you want to have spin currents through this crystal. So the protons are less restricted to the chiral structure. We don't have the chiral phonons, and we don't have the spin polarization of the electrons. So proton transfer is coupled to the electronic spin. You can ask yourself, maybe it's an external magnetic field, so you can change the contact. You can put non-magnetic contact or a little bit magnetic, depending how you count gold, or magnetic contact. Again, measure if I inject one magnetization or the opposite magnetization, what will be the difference? With magnetic contact, you see large difference. Without magnetic contact, you almost don't see a difference. So again, it is electronic spin. Here, the electronic spin is coupling to the proton, and since you have to preserve angular momentum, you have to add those chiral phonons to this picture. Moreover, if you want really to directly point or pinpoint those kind of results to the to the chiral phonons, what you can try to do is to locally heat up one side of the crystal, then measure AC, put AC current through it, so you can think about AC current, but measure second harmonic generation, the nonlinearity of the second harmonic, meaning that this current will, and this current, the response will not be similar. You will have some effective or disaffective. You have nonlinearity, and this means that you have a non-uniform current or nonlinear current going through this crystal by heating a local spot of this crystal. But if this will also say that, okay, phonons heated up, but I want to do it as a function of magnetic field to show that this relates. So if I inject one spin or the opposite spin, I will see differences in second harmonic. And this is what you see. This is a second harmonic generation by this AC current, but you see large difference in the second harmonic peak between one spin or another spin. So not only that we know that the electronic spins are coupled to the proton spins, we know that it's related to phonons, and those phonons, or chiral, we don't know it's chiral, but the crystal itself is chiral, and we saw the calculation that in chiral crystal, most or many of the phonons are chiral. We know also that it's related, the difference is related to electronic spin. So trying to sum this all in a one picture, this is what we put in the picture, is this kind of picture. We have the proton transfer with a standard proton hoping, but you need to remember that you have an opposite electronic wave going an opposite electronic wave, and you generate those chiral phonons whenever you have this kind of transfer. So you have a full way to explain this way in life, or how proton transfer in biological crystal by adding those chiral phonons. So this is nice to have to add to this community. And actually, it's interesting because now we thought it's a very nice game to play to do all this kind of coupling, but many people now from different community, from the bio-life community, are very excited about that because there was a lot of things missing in the simple hoping model, and now it may answer some of those answers, and there were many popular articles going out of this paper. Most of them are not correct, but it was nice to have some kind of, no, they are saying things which are not relevant, but yeah, it was nice to have this hype suddenly. And I want to end, I have a few more minutes, yeah? I want to end by a last model because I added just a few days ago, because Nicola had asked, how do you change chirality, or how would you start adding chirality to the system, or go from a system with large chirality to a small chirality? Of course, we cannot take this lysosome crystal and switch slowly by slowly the chirality, but we may have another way, and this is what I wanted to end with before giving you time for questions. So the thing is what you can do. You can take a metal or whatever substance that you want, and this is about 50 nanometer in thickness, and then start to add chiral molecules or whatever chirality start. I don't know how to say which is chiral, or let's say it's CD. You can add different lengths of these chiral molecules, this is polyalanine, on top of this metal. So what you add is another conducting channels of chiral phonons on the surface. So you can ask yourself, if I add this conducting channel of chiral phonons on the surface, would it influence the heat conductance and the by temperature of this metal? So you measure the metal itself, then you add this chiral channel. Usually you see very small differences, but I will argue that if you do here an ordered chiral structure, an ordered layer, which is only 1 nanometer or few nanometers as compared to this 50 nanometers, because of the chirality, we'll have another surface channel that will conduct heat rather well. And then, of course, you can change the chirality or the length or whatever properties that you want, let's say the CD, on top of this surface, and measure and ask yourself how much the heat conductance is improving. So how do we measure heat conductance? This Meital, another talented PhD students of mine. Actually, Ron can vouch for that. I have many PhD students, but more than half of them now are females, and they are usually very good. Not surprisingly, I didn't want to say they are better because I have a postdoc here, but they are very, very good. No, it's surprising in the physics group. They are excellent students. But it's not easy. I know maybe in this community it's very common. It's not easy to measure heat conductance in a very exact way. You need to give a pulse of a current. Then you need to measure the decay time. And then, and especially if it's very thin films, and then you measure the decay time at different current until you get the tau decay. And from this, you can monitor the heat conductance. So those are the results. This is the only paper which is unpublished. And what you see here, this is the heat conductance as a function of temperature, like people were showing yesterday. This is why I added this last night. And what you see is that if you take something which is achiral, it's racemic, you don't see this is a gold without the chiral molecules on top, and this is a gold with the chiral molecules. You don't see any change in the Debye temperature or in the heat conductance. But if you take just a monolayer of chiral molecules, you see an increase of the Debye temperature, and this is a large increase. This is a log scaling. Or this is a log scaling. So you see a large increase of the Debye temperature, and you see an increase of the peak or increase of the heat conductance. If you use non-chiral molecules, usually you see a little bit decrease of, so the molecules on top just are not warming it up or something like that. There is the conduction of phonons, of chiral phonons on the surface, which reduce scattering and improve the Debye temperature by a lot. By the way, if you just drop cast the molecules, you see the opposite effect. You destroy this channel and you see a reduction of the Debye temperature. So it's really an effect of an order chiral layer on the surface. And of course, now you have the system where you can play with chirality and ask yourself, how would this change be as a function of this chirality? So with that, I would like to conclude. First of all, I think that our two communities are very well connected. Ron was starting to say that, and Hiroshi will show his results, which are, actually I cited you, but I don't know if you noticed. I will show you. But Hiroshi will show his result about connection between vibration and chiral phonons and electronic spin. So the electronic spin is coupled to the nuclear spin, is coupled to the vibration of the phonons. And of course, we have a new way to measure or to have the chirality. And because we reduce scattering, we also have a more efficient way to have chiral phonons conduction. And then the last thing you need to think about, always have the angular momentum is conserved. So you need to calculate the full angular momentum, whether it's electron-electron scattering or electron-phonon scattering. So with that, I thank you for your attention.